Hello, welcome everybody. This is David Brower with the Make Living Pleasurable Show. Today we have a beautiful, fascinating guest, Amanda Archibald. Welcome to the show, Amanda.
Hi, great to join you across the Atlantic, right?
Exactly. Let me do an introduction here for you, Amanda, before we get going, and then we will dive into our fascinating conversation, which we've entitled here today, DNA Loves Pleasure and Connection. That's a pretty awesome subject. I'm really excited. So Amanda is a registered dietitian and a founder and a principal of the Genomic Kitchen, which I will share a little bit more about soon. She's connecting genomic science to everyday health, which is quite innovative. She's also a pioneer in this space in genomic nutrition. She's an author, an educator, a consultant, and a public health advocate. And she did found the Genomic Kitchen in 2017, showcasing the relationship between genes, food, and health. And she's been really on a mission to make this more widely understood, available to both people in the clinician world and also people like ourselves who are listening here. Also, exactly, it's very, very accessible to that. She works internationally with people, including some big pharmaceutical players, I understand it, here in France. What's also been very fascinating about your profile and your path to me, Amanda, is this field to plate concept that you also originated, which the idea of a nutritional education experience program. And that you're actually coming out with a book around this, as I understand, in spring 2022, which with Kate Waters will be called Genius in Your Kitchen. And it's really a first of its kind cooking course that teaches and translates nutrigenomic science and the art of cooking for your genes.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Amanda is a native of the UK and currently resides in, as we can see, the beautiful light on her face in the western high desert and mountains of Colorado. And just a little bit more about the Genomic Kitchen vision. It's really this really unique combination of combining genomic and nutrition science with state-of-the-art analysis that delivers really game-changing access to a whole person health and well-being. And we'll talk a little bit more about this so we can really get a grasp on what this is about with you, Amanda. But welcome to the Make Living Pleasurable Show.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that was a big introduction. And I just wanted to let you listeners know that I actually have a book. It's called The Genomic Kitchen. What I'm doing with Kate Waters in the UK is a course. So it's an online culinary experience where you can get to understand the science, but more importantly, you get to put it on your plate. So that's online accessible course. Genius in Your Kitchen.
Love that.
Right.
So let's just jump right into it, Amanda. So what is pleasure for you, by the way?
Oh, pleasure is being in Paris, I grew up in Europe. I'm British by birth, even though most people in Europe think, "Wow, you're an American." Americans know that there's a slight something with my accent that makes me not like pure born and bred here. But pleasure for me is truly being able to sit and with friends or be up in the mountains or be in the desert. But if I'm on the Mediterranean, it's raising a glass of wine, eating great food, and laughing with people. I mean, it just is. So it comes back to connectivity, but usually facilitated by a table of great food. So, yeah.
And clearly this is good for the genome.
With the food or the pleasure or the friends and the laughter.
The whole experience.
Yeah, the whole experience. So, it is, as you get older, you start to realize what's really important in your life, right? You know, when you're younger, it's like as fast as you can go and, you know, as much fun, as many highs as you can get, you know, skateboarding or whatever, you know, or singing, producing music. But I think as you get older, you get a little bit more kind of reminiscent about what's super important. We start to see that in the science as well. Things pop up, the connection between pleasure and connectivity and what's happening with your health. We actually now can see it through the lens of your genes. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that. How did you make the connection that actually this pleasurable way of being, of eating, of experiencing life, as you're talking about, has an impact on our DNA that we can actually measure and see?
Yeah.
And, you know, act on or react to.
Yeah, so let's set the stage and just kind of stop me as I go through it. So because we want to think about what's the landscape that may precipitate, what's the foundation that we may inquire, you know, make inquiries into science to know, do your genes make a difference? Right. So one of the places I started was because I've worked in food. I mean, I'm a dietitian. I'm always interested in food, which is the information, is what the information your body works from. You know, it's what steers your operating system. So I've always been in that space. But when I studied genomics, which we'll define here shortly, I realized we now know that what you eat can steer how your genes operate. So I laid that down to start with, to say I was really curious about longevity. You know, we all would like to live a long, healthy life. And the more pleasure and connection we have in life, the longer we'll live. How do we know that? And is there a genetic component? So probably you, David, are familiar with the blue zones research, I would imagine. And have your listeners heard about this, or should we quickly kind of...
Yeah, why don't you just explain that?
Yeah, so the blue zones research is very interesting. So this came out, in 2005, 2006 maybe? And so the blue zones, why is it called the blue zones? Because these are pockets, or scientifically established pockets around the world of individuals, clusters of individuals who live to be over the age of 100. And it's not just a couple of people in a village. It's literally, you can walk into a village and a lot of people are over the age of 100. So Dan Buettner got with a team of researchers and said, okay, can we find out the why behind this? What's the data? So did a series of interviews. And by the way, the reason that they came up with the word blue zone has nothing to do with the color of their hair. It has to do with when the scientists were sort of noting or mapping where these places were. They used a blue pen. So it's blue ink on a map. It's the blue zone, you know. It's like, because you sit there thinking blue hair, gray hair. So I always love that kind of interesting piece. So when this research came out, I was, of course, really interested in the food side, and I would be starting to teach clinicians around the world there's a shaping of food that is consistent, which we won't talk about today, but it's a consistent message to the body through these different elders. You know, what are they eating? How's that informing their genes? What I started to realize, which I think is really the foundation of where we want to go in our conversation, is there's a whole other side of the blue zones research, which had to do with lifestyle. And I found this amazing because there were certain tenets that we know about. What is one of them? These centenarians were friends with the same people all their lives. Now, I didn't mean to say their circle of friends didn't grow. What it was or is that if they went to kindergarten or nursery school or whatever you call it, wherever you are in the world, so when they first went to school, because a lot of these people lived in the same village all their lives, they knew the same people all their lives. That circle of friend. And I think we can translate that in Europe, which we're missing in the US, as you know, David, is the cafe society. So in Paris, les brasseries, you know, the Cafe da Trattoria in Italy, or as I like to think of in Greece, you know, you go into these little tiny towns and, you know, the old guys are sitting out there for hours, right, nursing the same cafe or a little glass of wine, and they're just connecting with each other. And so these people connect. And the conversation is, how do we explore that, connect that to the DNA? So it's really important. They have the same friends all their life. They have a sense of purpose. When they get up in the morning, even if they're sheep herders, They know why they're alive. When you lose sight of what you're living for, you can slide into cognitive decline. We know that. You slide into loneliness. These people are revered and honored by their family for their knowledge as elders. So they weren't excluded, they're included. Just like we know with Native Americans, that the elders are the most important people in the tribe, right? Because of their inherited knowledge. So sense of purpose, movement, with nature, so natural movement, not going to, we got to go to the gym 5 days a week because there's a class and we're, doing all that. Important, but a sense of movement. And then a sense of spirituality. So those people who connected spiritually or, had a religious purpose, maybe they were Catholic or Jewish or Muslim or whatever. Can you see like it's a connection? So this was absolutely amazing to me. In other words, the parallel or the thread between all of it is they knew why they got up in the morning and they felt loved and connected. And there's some more pieces from the Blue Zones. So what you see is what I learned from this is connectivity and social inclusion was integral to longevity. Community was everything, right? So this we know through research. So then the question is, how does that pivot to your genes? So I'm going to stop in case you have some questions of me before I say,
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And the part of it which just arose to me, came to me is it's been challenging, particularly in the last 2 years, where we have been relegated to only having online connection. It's like Zoom fatigue. I mean, it doesn't really matter how many communities you're involved with, even your family, you're kind of, but I can see how that would be useful. So how do you see that translating to the lives that we often lead today, where it seems like we're having a challenge to recreate the in-person connection to get the value of what you're speaking about what you're sharing about the Blue Zones.
Well, if you think so, I mean, we're talking about we're trying to be post-pandemic, right? We're crawling away, depending on where we are in a part of the world. Gosh, I just lost my train of thought, but there was something about what we've learned, I think, from COVID, and then we'll circle back, is that the parallel between people being forced to be isolated and the rise in mental health, crises, anxiety, and depression, it was like, it's exponential, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what country in the world. I think of it like pulling back a bow, and shooting an arrow right at the heart and nailing what people took for granted, which was connecting with their friends or what have you. It's like, okay, so if that's the case, why did this precipitate such a mental health crisis? And I don't know if it's the same in France. I would imagine I'm following around the world this precipitation of mental health crises, which is really genetically we can see that some people are predisposed to not coping well. But then when you take out the rug of connection and social inclusion, it's not surprising that some people just really fall off. It just pushes them over. So what this makes me think of is, what is it we know in the science? So this was observational from the Blue Zones. Given that genes direct, what genes do is they create the proteins on which your body is built, right? Whether it's structure like muscles or your eyes or what else we think of, bones. That's what genes do. They create the recipe for life. They create the recipe for the enzymes that connect all the dots in your body. They can make the recipes for hormones, which are communication molecules. So they're pretty important. And what differentiates one from the other it's like, no genes, no life. They are your blueprint. What differentiates
blue genes, of course, right? Blue genes.
Yeah.
Blue zone.
Yeah, I know. We had to have fun this afternoon. So they create the recipe for life. And what differentiates us are these little differences in our genes that make our traits, right? That's why, I'm female and you're male, and I have blonde hair, and well, it was blonde. I have this color hair and you have your hair, et cetera, et cetera. And why some people may have early onset diabetes, some people have a hard time losing weight, some people have anxiety and others don't. These are little differences in your genes. So what we've learned in genetics, and then I want to talk about isolation, what we know from the research that what we've learned in genetics is there's a field which is amazing to me called human social genomics. So we've always known in genetics, not always known, we've known probably in the last 20 years, how our gene differences steer health predispositions or type of exercise best for you. But the question that researchers ask in the field of human social genomics is, why is it that some people living in different circumstances have earlier onset of things like asthma or diabetes? And think about, say, kids who are living in New York City or in Paris or London versus kids who live out in the countryside in any country. And what the researchers found is there's a set of conditions that turn on the wrong genes in your body. And I'm going to give you an example here, that predispose people to early onset of these diseases. And then we're going to connect it back to the social part. So what they found is, in the right conditions, and what are some of the conditions? Kids who are growing up in socioeconomically deprived environments, so poor, in poverty. Kids who are growing up with parents who are divorced, so they have to look after their young ones. So you can see the lack of connection, right? Kids who are bullied, or people who are bullied, people who are in violent or domestic abuse type relationships. So people living in a lot of stress, which COVID brought about, right? You add up violence, bullying, disconnection, isolation, and what happens genetically. And this was probably one of the most amazing talks I've ever seen in my life in 2015, which was titled Human Social Genomics. What happens genetically is, in these cases, we're turning on pro-inflammatory genes. So your genes are designed to turn on to combat, disease like COVID or what have you. So there's an automatic immune response, which we need. What happens is, if you don't turn off that immune response and it stays on, it's like having the radio on all the time. Not that anyone listens to the radio, it's having music on all the time. And so it just, it kind of starts pixelating you. It's like an irritant. And this results in onset of chronic diseases because you don't have an end or a disruption to the immune response. And the converse of that, which was amazing, so not only do you have your immune system upregulated, as we say, or permanently turned on, but you turn off your natural antiviral response. Imagine that. So here we have COVID, which is a virus, right? You have people who are living in all kinds of different conditions, like in discord before COVID. When we look around the world disproportionately at the people who have passed away, they are the sick, the frail, and often the poor, where the poor may already be suffering from obesity or predisposition, asthma, underlying or precondition, or what do we call it? Pre-medical conditions. I'm not thinking of the right words. And COVID comes along and adds, and not only an sort of an additional attack on the immune system. The immune system is already upregulated, but they can't downregulate or can't turn on their antiviral genes because the stress of where they've been living and coming from has inverted their body's response. That's incredible. Yeah. So it's just, so this is human social genomics, where the environment that people are living in is changing how their body responds to the environment, if you will. So they're predisposed to things like asthma. When you think about why, or diabetes or weight gain. So that's the genetics. And
so let me pause you for a second and ask a question. So in this scenario where it sounds like we're under a certain amount of stress, and I believe this can relate probably to lots of other parts of our lives, right?
Yeah.
yeah, where this is ongoing. I mean, we're in a bit of an extreme scenario recently, but how do we then recognize, one, and two, how do we turn either off or on the DNA? Is this getting back to, the pleasure of connection and the blue zone lifestyle? I mean, what are the ways for us to actually be able to turn back on or off so it doesn't just continue in the way that it's not, it's almost like you put the plane on autopilot and you're not checking in. Are we still heading in the right direction? There was all these winds in the plane. Yeah.
I think, first of all, is recognizing the science, and this is now very clear. Like we have commissions in England, for example, like a commission or the Ministry of Loneliness, I think, right? It was in the UK. And it's around the world, same in Australia and the US. We know that we may put it under the banner of loneliness, but basically that's code word for disconnection. So now we know that that's true. We have to look at how are we going to bring people back together. So I think first you have to say this is a valid issue. And I can provide, citations for you if people are interested in reading more about this, particularly if there's any scientists listening. We know this. And then I think, like you and I, like we're storytelling. I'm telling the story of what we know about longevity. And the foundation of longevity is actually, it's good food, but it's also connection. So I think that's the story that needs to be told with validation in science, so people can say, okay, because if you don't give people a reason or a blueprint, right, to move forward, if you just say, okay, y'all need to go out and play, nobody's going to get up and move, right? And yet we know through the science, like with kids, like since 2012, this was like the onslaught of the use of the smartphone. Like it came at us like a deluge. That the increase in loneliness and depression among kids is exponential because they're connecting via their smartphones and they're not going to go outside and play on slides. Or just go there, or maybe, and there's a brilliant book. It's come right. Last Child in the Woods, brilliant. So write that down.
Last Child in the Woods. We'll put it in the notes also.
Yeah, and I just want to make a point about one-to-one connection versus team sports. So what this writer was talking about is we've lost vitamin N, where the N is nature, and that we need nature. And what happened in the United States, and I grew up in England, and it's probably changed. Even team sports there has changed since I lived there. But what has happened is instead of kids kind of going outside and being in the woods or whatever, they get put into these team environments, competitive environments. So that they're not able to be and connect one-on-one. And, when you're 5 years old, you go hold hands. It doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. You just did stuff and you goofed around. And the infrastructure, I can speak for the United States, has changed so much that kids don't kick a ball in the street anymore. Somebody might get run over or whatever else happens in this country. Or instead of having a natural park like you'd see in England or Germany, which is part of building a community, we now have big playing fields, with the huge, baseball diamonds or whatever, and those huge overhead lights. And kids are in team sports, so they're competing all the time. They're not loving all the time. So this, even how we connect has changed. So there's a lot to be said for the cafe society, growing up in Europe and speaking French and living in France. You can sit in a cafe in Paris, and someone can be reading Le Monde, and somebody can be reading Le Figaro, which are completely different political views, but they can still have a conversation, right? So that cafe society and bringing that back around the world, or making sure we don't lose it, I think is so important because it's the village square of our lives.
So you don't think we can overdose from too much connection?
No, we're dying from lack of it, and that's what science is showing. So there was research done in Europe and in the United States, and this is very interesting to the point about genes. And when we look at people who divorce or marital discord, people who are in who maybe divorced, who've gone through a really stressful relationship or had a sudden breakup, or people who stay in a bad relationship have a much higher incidence of heart disease or myocardial infarction, a heart attack. And what they say is it's subdivided, so if you're over the age of 55, when we put that lens on there, then men are far more likely to have a heart attack than women. It doesn't mean say either or, but discord and disconnect drives disease, and it's coming from sort of upregulating those those genes that will turn on immune response but leave it on, and turn off genes that will help cope with a virus, so antiviral genes. So that is really, really important. And we're very clear on the science that the root of this, to get rid of this, is harmony and connectivity, the bottom line. So we've gone all the way from, peer-reviewed research through to how genes work, through to what we now know in the science about what happens with discord or anger or violence or bullying prevalent around the world, right? And what happens to disease. So the roots of disease a lot of times now are related. There's genetics, right? There's predispositions, which we now can work with. But I would say a bigger root is disconnection and lack of touch and pleasure, because they whisper to our genes. Our genes like to be cuddled, with the right information.
Yeah, I've been missing that cuddling during COVID. I was with a friend last week who has the most lovable dog imaginable, who's also antigenic. Is it like with no hair, no dander, no hair? So anyone who's allergic or intolerant, a little bit like me, sometimes with animals, can cuddle and kiss and not have that sort of fear. That there's a DNA thing I need to turn off there, but and I could just I realized how meaningful it is to connect even with an animal, and I have much more appreciation, I believe, now from this last week of this sentient being that is an animal, and the love that can be transmitted between that. And I was also in a family situation last week where I got a sense of that also. So this connection from a DNA perspective sounds like it even has the ability to help people overcome the other stressors and challenges that they're experiencing in their lives, including COVID, but maybe work, or I don't know, any of a number of things that we face that are challenging in life, merely because our connection with other humans is meaningful and pleasurable, and we enjoy it. Is that
right? And I think, that connection with us, like a caveat there, because I was thinking about, so a lot of the research I did here was obviously part of what I do is that for a living, but I was doing a presentation in Sydney a couple of years ago, and I was doing we're trying to look at the connectivity connection, or I think it was called collision course, 21st century collision course, where I was looking at the collision with the environment we live in and health. And, a large part of that presentation, as I was scanning to look for what the themes were, came down to connectivity and loneliness. I mean, probably 30 slides about this because I'm working with scientists. So yeah, there's other things. But the reason I mention that is, if you're in a poor work condition, so the highest stress workers in the world, this was 2 years ago, live in the Netherlands. Who would have thought? So Japan also, but the Netherlands, followed by, I forgot the second country. Third is the UK, fourth is the USA. And France isn't in there, but Germany and Belgium are in there. So very high stress. Yeah, France, you're somewhere. But isn't it interesting?
We're ultra efficient. Haven't you seen us on the efficient productivity range? We're way up there, nonetheless.
Spain didn't show up, But you know what? Here's the thing, when you look at the data, Spain has one, I think it's the new world's longevity zone. Now, of course, it does change. That doesn't surprise me. My parents live in Spain. They get up, okay, we cannot stereotype, but it's a cafe society, right?
Yeah, very
Beautiful
community,
society.
very,
Italy,
very religious.
very religious,
Lots
sense
of
of purpose.
gatherings, great food, culture, and a
And,
lot of
you
that.
eat breakfast,
Friends,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, you know what was,
connection.
to your point about, religion. So the other thing that we learned from the Blue Zones, I don't want to lose my train of thought. It's, and you'll love this, they take time for themselves every single day. So what was interesting about that is, okay, it's a siesta, or it used to be, in Southern Europe, across Europe. The Greeks would take it, yeah. So what did they say? The Southern Europeans would take a nap. The Greeks would have sex, which made me laugh. Like, really? But in Okinawa, every day, these centenarians would take time to stop and think about their ancestors, ones that they love. So connecting, because that, just like Native Americans, is like your heritage and your ancestry is who you are. So they was like, what is it, the Day of the Dead, or what have you? Do this in Latin America, Mexico. You honor those who passed before you because they passed on to you your DNA and who you are and your traditions and your cultures, etc. So it's that connect. This is an intergenerational connection. The Seventh-day Adventists, as you're more familiar with in the United States, are also a longevity community and movement. That's what they take time to move every day. Not like, we don't have to get a heart rate up. It is like that intent of going into nature and moving. So it was amazing, that these are, it's a sense of purpose for life, but recognizing and stopping where you are in life, reaching out, connecting to yourself, connecting to others.
Yeah.
So, and you go back to Spain, sense of purpose, very religious country, or very Catholic, but that just means that everybody is. Food, they gather around the table, and you can't get a reservation until 8 at night. I mean, Spain wakes up at 8 at night, right? It's, that's when it happens. Think about in Italy, where I lived for a while, aperitivo, which is what aperitivo is. In America or in English, it's like, how much can you drink for the most little amount of money, and how many tacos can you eat? You know what I mean? It's a pitcher of beer and 5 tacos for $1 or whatever. Aperitivo is breaking between the workday and the evening, right? It's like stopping off, or you make have your Prosecco or whatever, a Negroni. And it's the transition from maybe connecting outside to connecting to yourself, to connecting to your family. And these countries, Greece, Spain, also have these holidays. Not necessarily there's religious holidays, but every year there's a wine harvest, right? Or in Germany, you celebrate the asparagus and the morel and, these different seasons. So people are always connected. And when we lose sight of the wine harvest, or it's this time of year when we have this special parade or what have you, then we are unmoored and we're in a pro-inflammatory situation. And COVID, I think, just shot an arrow right at that, and it ripped out people's roots. And if you have genes that, can slightly predispose you to anxiety, mood swings, we all have them, just some people have more predisposition. It just pushes them off the ledge.
Amazing. So I just want to circle back again. So Amanda Archibald, you were saying that by living our lives in certain ways with connection, with outdoors, with friends, with a purpose, with honoring the elders, with some spiritual connection, this so-called human social genomics, we can change our DNA in a way that can allow us to live a healthier life and a longer life. And, why aren't we valuing this rather fundamental perspective more? Are we addicted, brainwashed? Like, what is it that makes us not value this and be able to lean into the habits and ways of being and living and lifestyle. It's a great way to look at it. I prefer the word lifestyle over habits. Why aren't we doing this more and more to come back to these fundamentals?
I think that I think the science has to be there. You have to have the inquiry, right? I think a lot of us in that inquiring stage right now. And epidemiology, it looks at this is a study of disease. It's like, why do we start to have this cohorts of people or have early onset of things that our ancestors probably didn't die from until they're in the 90s? So scientific inquiry requires us to ask questions about why so much suicide, why this, why that, right? So you start with the question, you do the research that points you back to commonalities, which then we can present to the public, just as I'm talking about now, and say, maybe it's time to stop and do some inquiry in your own life, because we know what the tenets are for longevity. Now, there's other aspects to it, but it is very clear all the way from the blue zones before that and now from very dynamic peer-reviewed scientific literature that if you don't connect, lack of connection is loneliness and isolation. If you don't connect, these are the consequences. So I think we're now just seeing that in the science. So we can now present that, through podcasts and whatever. People will come up with all kinds of products and services, but you have to be aware of it before you can do anything about it. And we've also, and you and I know this, in the last 10 years, our worlds have changed with our devices. Was Instagram around 10 years ago, and Facebook? And, there's 20 different ways to connect, and none of them require talking to anyone. They're just called clicking. So the advent of the smartphone, while people have the illusion it connects them, and I love that I can talk and walk around the world now. But as soon as you get off video, a lot of people are just picking up a device, and that cannot cuddle you. It can't comfort you. You can listen to music, right? But it can't provide, I think, that electrical impulse connection, right, that comes from a hug. It can't hug you. You can listen to the greatest music, but when you turn over at night, there is no connection or warmth that comes from a device. So we're kidding ourselves. And I think maybe scientifically we're seeing through human social genomics, and maybe the science is there and I just haven't read it, but that there's something about the power of touch and what is it? What is it? Is it a heartbeat? Is it warmth? Is it the temperature of your skin? Probably, but how's that working versus a cold, hard device, which has replaced humanity, is replacing humanity?
Yeah, no, we all know about the energetics and what is it? Not dopamine, but is it serotonin when you hug for 20 seconds with somebody?
Yeah. There's always a
all
dance
sorts of
between serotonin and dopamine, but yes, but we know and you know this from your own reading, that when we're working with people who have cognitive decline, first of all, what precipitates cognitive decline? There's a genetic component, of course, but isolation. We know isolation will predispose people into early cognitive decline and depression faster than anything else. That we know. But so the point about hugging and loving something is studies with people who are living with Alzheimer's or cognitive decline, who may be in a care setting, so not in home. When you give them an animal to hug and love, or when you put them out in nature and they can garden or touch or smell flowers, we're actually able to measure, I don't say necessarily a turnaround, but we're able to measure a reaction, a comfort.
It's a moment of pleasure. It's a moment of connection and love, and
So that is neurological.
And you can see the measure. You're saying you can measure that.
Yeah, you can measure that, and also their outlook, their mood, just like watching visibly somebody smile who was isolated, in their minds or in their rooms, in their brains, in a box, So I think to answer your question, we have to realize, we have to inquire, look at the science, create the case, make the case, and then say, okay, people, this is what's happening. Now, what are we going to do at a public health level? What are we going to do at a community level? What can we do at a town planning, a city planning level? You know, build ways that, like in Paris, you can kind of cycle from one end to the other now. You know, they've got a beach in Paris. What are these public spaces where people can safely connect? Is, I think, you know, this can come all the way from the science to city planning, you know, and after school planning and making sure seniors aren't alone. And on and on and on.
Yeah, there's so much to do there. Now, what about hugging yourself? Does that change your DNA, your connection?
You know, I don't
does
know.
Does it trick your DNA? Can you almost imagine that someone's hugging you?
So as long as what it is, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, you know, you can hug yourself all you want, but if you're in a very stressful work environment, or you walking home to a very stressed environment, you've got to fix the stresses first, right? You've got to do the hard work first of what is causing an imbalance that can prevent me from getting pleasure, like from being by myself, or pleasure being with other people. So it's almost like doing an inventory. It's probably something that Celine and you do really well, you know, guiding people to look within themselves and look at what's preventing you from connecting to your DNA. You know, what are the blocks? And how do you do that inventory? You know.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Amanda, why don't you share with us a little bit about where we can find you, in person, connecting, or somewhere else in the universe?
Western Colorado. That's where I'm located. So my company is the Genomic Kitchen. So it's www.genomickitchen.com, or Google my name, Amanda Archibald, RD. Both will come up. That's SEO, right? That's the power of SEO, which connects us to nothing. But it's all space, right? Everyone's like, do SEO. And I'm like, but that doesn't give me, that can't shake somebody's hand with SEO. But yeah, it's the same on Instagram. I forget Twitter. I don't do Twitter. So you could just, you know, on Facebook, we have a pretty good presence. But so that's the way you find me. I have a book, The Genomic Kitchen. That's all about connecting, choosing food so you understand how it works with your genes and how it works with your genes. So it's a culinary forward book. Yeah, and you know, my website's designed so you can touch me as much as you want. You know, if you just want to kind of pass by, you can do that. You sign up for a newsletter, read my blog, you know, take a free course, or take one of our courses. And of course, you know, on a day-to-day basis, I do work in clinical practice. Pretty busy, but I do help people understand their DNA around the world. I open up, or I unzip the DNA and show you your blueprint, and then we work, you know, with massaging your blueprint to meet your health goals. So, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll add those links in below. So, just maybe a couple more questions, and then we'll close up the show here. One of them is what you were just talking about, actually. How does someone get a better sense of the foods and I guess liquids that they consume, that they are in harmony and optimized for their particular DNA genetic makeup? Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, every single one of us is different. So the way you get that super fine tune is we do what I call a clinically relevant DNA test. So this isn't looking for mutations or, you know, or can predict early demise. That's not what we're looking at. So that kind of work, which is what I do, allows me to talk to you about certain foods that we would introduce to basically whisper to your genes or hug your genes. We got genes that work beautifully. We got genes that don't get out of bed. And we got genes that are slackers, which means they're just like, maybe I'll show up today, maybe I won't, you know. And so we can use food to give them a kick up the rear end, if you will, and say, come on, you know, get up, you know, do your job. And sometimes we have genes that are missing, so we create a diversion, right? We create a workaround for those genes. So this varies from one person to the next. So what I would talk to you about is completely different from the next person. So So the important thing there is, I said, clinically relevant. So what you buy over the internet, what you can get, on your local store. I don't know, where you are, if you can do that, but there was definitely an era here in the U.S. where, you can go to one of the major stores and oh, I can do a DNA test. That is not you. That's selling you something that you don't need. That is opening the door and saying, give us your DNA and we'll tell you what supplement to take or what kind of diet you fit into. That's not the work we do, because we're trained at a clinical level to do our work. So that's what I do. And you come out, and sometimes we need a little bit of supplemental support, tiny bits. So if I ever do that with someone, it's very strategic, and it's like turning on a fire hose. I'll just say, okay, let's add a little bit of resveratrol, which you find in red wine, because it's going to hit 20 genes, and the purpose of that is to do this in your body. So it's incredible.
And is it it's extraordinary. Is it like a photograph? I mean, what's the shelf life time of this kind of experience with you?
Yeah, and
because it's one moment where some of our DNA is turned on, off.
No,
maybe we're in a stressful moment.
How does it work? So first of all, if anyone's interested, the way we look at DNA is we take what we call a buccal swab. So it's like you take like a Q-tip, if you will. Well, it's not a Q-tip, and you swipe the inside of your cheeks like 30 seconds. Put it in a seal. It's a sealed test tube, and that goes to the lab. So we're looking at saliva. Isn't that amazing? So it's not even invasive at all. So it's saliva. Yeah. So to answer your question, what's important here is your genetic blueprint is your genetic blueprint. And you'll find this interesting, David. So you have these genes for life. Some things, it's called epigenetics, can modulate your genes, but it's not changing the genes itself. It's changing like external influences on the genes. So if people go through severe trauma, PTSD, how many people have gone through trauma, lost loved ones? It's not that the genes will change. It's you're switching on things. It's like you're prodding. So it's called epigenetic changes. That can change your genes, but the overall picture doesn't change so much. It's just you suddenly switch on genes you want to turn off. And that all comes back to being rooted, right, and being connected. And like if you realize you're somebody who's just kind of gone off the deep end, literally, or you suddenly feel I'm not the same person as I was, that can be epigenetics. And genetics, we can actually look at it and say, okay, you had this predisposition before and you were managing it, but bam, in comes a traumatic event, lost loved one, divorce, child dies, something horrible like that, dog dies, partner dies. Yeah. That can influence your genes. But in general, your genes do not change. So you do this one time. I think it's just one of the best tools that we've had in medicine probably in our lifetime. You've had the understanding penicillin, right? There's these parts in science and history. Yeah. Incredible. But DNA, talk about get to the root of who you are and unzip who you are. It's the blueprint for how you're built. And I read how you're built and then advise you around the reason you're feeling this way, how you can fine tune your inner workings within your DNA.
That's just so amazing, Amanda. Thank you for the work that you're bringing to the world, and thank you for being on the show. Traditionally, we end the show with the guest actually ending the show for us to share with us any other messages, the main message you want to get across about DNA, loving, pleasure, and connection, and then we'll say goodbye to everyone.
Well, I think the story we told today, you can see, we've made the point that connectivity is at the root of longevity and health. It doesn't matter how many times you go to the gym, how much you biohack yourself. If you're missing that root, you're missing a key part of how you can live a long, healthy life. And I think the second thing, if you're hearing from me, I've been in this space a long time. Nothing has changed how I look at my work and how I can influence health of others more than DNA. So I absolutely hope in my lifetime, every single individual will have access and will kind of move to DNA analysis, and because it will change your life in terms of being empowered by what you can put in your body, the way you exercise, the way you connect. You're in total control, and that's what DNA does for you.
Magnificent. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thank you.
See you all at the next Make Living Pleasurable show. Until then, love your DNA and let your DNA love you, right?
Yeah.
Give it a hug. Yeah, get someone to give it a hug. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.